There's no one else that's going to talk about some of the things I talk about in this video, and I don't know why, if it's embarrassment or what, but I see a lot of what I struggled with in this series, and a lot of that in other people as well. Because the likely reason why you feel so unconfident or whatever it may be is spoke about in episode 4 after a pretty harrowing scene. So our main character talks about how he used to be pretty outgoing, but then one incident happens and that makes him wary. And then because he's more wary, the way he acts towards other people changes, and therefore the way they act towards him changes. And obviously that creates kind of a downward spiral, which just goes on and on, getting worse and worse. And this kind of negative spiral doesn't have to be caused by anything nearly as dramatic as what Hobin went through. It can be just talking to someone who responds negatively to you, which makes you more anxious to talk to the next person, right? Which in turn makes them more likely to respond negatively to you, or at least not positively. And obviously, it can also ingrain into your body, through your posture and so forth. You can quite often tell just by looking at someone if they're comfortable with themselves or not. But more importantly, it can start at such a young age. So you hit your teenage years and feel like you've been anxious and awkward your whole life. It makes it seem like that's just naturally how you are. Now, obviously what I've said doesn't apply to everyone, right? There's a whole host of reasons, but I think that's far more common than people realize, which I had the same reaction as you might do to this, which is just, it's extremely frustrating because it's not at all your fault. But we're going to talk about what you can actually do about it, and it's explained really well with Hobin's story. So the show starts off with, the classic school environment where the main character's being bullied but doesn't stand up for himself. His mum's in hospital and her medical bills are exactly as much as Rumi made from a lunchtime stream, so he has to work at a part-time job after school, but it doesn't pay anywhere near what they were making from that stream. And yeah, it's such a horrid feeling having to work a job you hate after having an already bad day. So I really do feel for him, and it seems like he's had all his pride beaten out of him, quite literally. He even ends up agreeing to let Snapper, the cameraman, come over to his house using his mum's bank details to make money from streaming in his room, as he's too young to have a bank account himself. And he grumbles in his head about how annoyed he is at the situation and how annoyed he is at having to cook for him. And obviously it seems crazy looking in, why does he allow him to do all of this? He's in his house, and that's the point I'm going to come back to in more detail, but for now just note that it's not really fear, is it? He's not scared. He's kind of just going along with it. And I think just from my own experience, although I never went through anything remotely on this scale, more just, the odd comment, because I was very awkward and timid growing up, you kind of just get used to it. You create this mental divide between you and everyone else. Even if it's just subconscious, you start to think, I'm not like them. I can't do the same things they do. And that's going to be another major point I come back to. But when he trips and splatters Snapper with the food, he then tells Hobin that it's his fault his mum has cancer, which finally causes him to snap. And the important part being, he immediately realizes that fighting isn't as big of a deal as he thought, right? Which again, I'll come back to very soon. I know there's a lot of things I say I'm going to come back to. I will do very, very soon. Because as the camera keeps running and their fight gets uploaded, Hobin awakes to find a crazy number of views, and hence a crazy paycheck too. When Snapper brawls him again over it, he realizes that it's just not such a big deal. He's already done this once, and that one time alone was enough to shatter the whole perception he had of himself. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying go and hit me, right? But the point is, once you start to do these things you normally wouldn't, and it doesn't have to even be 1% as extreme as this, it could literally just be saying hi to someone you're walking past. But even those little things, they start to change the identity you've got in your head really fast, and it's honestly as simple as that, right? You can't think or learn yourself into being confident. I tried out when I was younger. I'd watch all those quite cringy how to be more confident videos. It all goes out the window the second you talk to someone, right? Because your subconscious knows that nothing's changed, and it's because you've not given it a reason to believe that something's changed. And so we see all the time that as soon as anything out of the ordinary happens, Hobin starts referring to himself as a loser again, right? So despite the title of this video, just watching it isn't actually going to do anything for you. You might feel like it has for a bit, right? You get a surge of feeling good and motivation, but if you don't do anything after you watch this video, nothing is going to happen, right? You can't just flick a switch and change it. There really isn't an instant fix. Remember what I said about the start about the likely reason you don't feel confident? That grew over years and years. So you're not going to be able to change all that in an instant, right? It'll take a bit of time, but not nearly as long as you think. And we actually see that in the very next scene, where after some quite ruthless negotiating, Hobin really does stand up for himself, with Snapper initially trying to start a negotiation off with him getting 90% of the revenue, and it ends with Hobin getting 90% of the revenue. So the two agree to go into business together, creating YouTube videos with Hobin fighting and Snapper filming. And so, having done it once with Snapper, he's now willing to stand up to the big man himself, Pakgo. And this doesn't go well. However, Snapper manages to catch some footage of Pakgo beating Hobin, and as such, Pakgo's channel plummets in popularity. Right, but it's not the last time the two fight, so we will come back to this. But the important part here is it's stopped by Meunsong, the young MMA champion, who's, he's everything Hobin isn't. Right, we can see the awe and jealousy in his eyes as he scares off even Pakgo with just a few words. He's really introduced as a man from a different world to Hobin. He could never even imagine someone being able to scare Pakgo like that. And he's even drawn slightly differently compared to everyone else here. He's quite a bit sharper looking. But the really important part here is, while they do currently live in different worlds, those two worlds aren't as far apart as they might seem. They're far, don't get me wrong, but spend a bit of time moving in that direction, and the distance will close a lot quicker than you'd expect, because you're mostly like most other people. Obviously, outliers exist, yeah, and to be fair, this guy is probably one of them. But if you do the same things those other people are doing, you'll start to get similar results, right? If you start learning how to fight, you'll get better at fighting. I used to have this kind of thought process, and I see it quite often in people with, fairly low self-esteem, where they kind of convince themselves that they couldn't do X, Y, Z, that they're somehow the special exception that just couldn't get good at a certain thing, right? And whilst a lot of what I said is more things that used to affect me 5, maybe something close to 10 years ago, this one I was honestly guilty of up until maybe 2 years ago. I put off starting kickboxing, funny enough, quite related to the anime, for a long time, even though it was something I wanted to do because I thought, well, I'm too awkward or whatever to do it, right? But meanwhile, there was a professional MMA fighter with one arm who's won title fights, so stop being so hard on yourself. Someone in a much worse situation than you has gotten to where you want to go. The problem isn't you, it's what you're doing. And speaking of which, later that night, Hobin starts to do exactly that and stumbles across a channel with basically 0 views. It's later shown that Meunsong actually learned from this exact same place, which is kind of proof of the point I just made, right? As once he starts following these videos, he's actually able to kind of fight. Not as well as Meunsong, but obviously he's not been doing it for nearly as long, so that's to be expected. So with the success of his YouTube channel growing, he ends up quitting his part-time job, and his co-worker Bomi, he's had a thing for, ends up giving him her number, much to his shock. And so later on, he ends up going on a date with her in a really interesting scene, and I'm not sure how many people are going to relate to the next bit I'm talking about, but he gets embarrassed because of his height, and he feels like she's more attractive than him, etc. And the people around him are commenting on it, and he can overhear them, and so he goes all awkward and silent and withdrawn when she tries to talk to him. She asks him what his hobbies are, and he just says nothing. She asks him where he wants to go afterwards, and he just says nothing. And the thing is, I remember I used to be like this, right? And it simply comes from a place of not feeling good enough or not comfortable with yourself. I can't tell them what I like because it's weird or they'll like me less. But not only will people think that you're being rude when you do this, even though you're not trying to be, right? That's just how it comes across when you're so embarrassed of yourself that you don't even actually make conversation with people, right? From their view, it's just like you're being rude and that you don't like them. But not only that, being ashamed of these little things really changes the way you see yourself. If you feel like you have to hide part of yourself to others, how are you ever going to be confident in yourself? As I said earlier, our subconscious is super good at noticing these kind of things, right? And if you're always lying to others about things like that, it's going to start building an identity of I'm beneath everyone else. Just the way our brains have evolved to figure out, our place within the tribe hierarchy. So it's a small thing, but I honestly noticed that once I stopped doing that, my social anxiety really dropped as well. There really is no reason you should see yourself as unworthy of even talking about your hobbies. There's no reason to be embarrassed by it. So just own it instead, right? And that is exactly what Hobin ends up doing, and Bomi has a ton of respect for it. However, then we have episode 4. Pakgo comes back to get his revenge. He beats him senseless, humiliates him in front of Bomi, and then tells him to take off his clothes and apologize in front of all his viewers. So how did this happen? Well, he only watched the first video. He only spent 1 month training and then stopped. And so Pakgo knows how to beat the single move he learned. Meunsong comes and saves him, and an utterly ashamed Hobin is left alone to wallow in despair. It's a feeling we've all experienced, even if not under quite so extreme circumstances. But that feeling of being utterly inferior to everyone else, we've all been there at some point. But the important, admirable thing is, he doesn't let himself wallow for long. He goes home, he watches more of those videos, and he gets to work. A month later, he returns to school, walks up to Pakgo, and with all the confidence in the world, tells Snap to film him. So what on earth happened in that month? He trained. That's it. He just did basic training and focused on learning a single kick. You don't need to make it any more complicated than that when you're starting off. You know, obviously the example in this anime is fighting, right? But I'm assuming the thousands of people who will watch this will have thousands of different things they want to do. But if you're just starting out, pick one, you know, and whilst getting better at anything will make you more confident, I think either going to the gym or fighting are actually both great places to start if you don't know what you want to do, but you want to do something, right? Because the extra layer you get of either looking better or the extra bit of confidence from, you know, knowing no one can mess with you if it really came down to it. Anything is fine, right? The point is just to prove to yourself that you can do something you thought you couldn't. And the result of this next fight is exactly that. You know, no doubt for his whole life, he never would have thought he could actually beat Pakgo in a fight. I mean, just look at the size difference. With just a bit of training in the right direction made all the difference. After just 1 month of dedicating everything he had, he was a different man. He'd practiced the same kick, a calf low kick, 10,000 times, using it to slow Pakgo down. However, it soon becomes very clear to him that he only has one move, or so it seems. In the exact moment Pakgo thinks he's got him, with a defiant yell of, "I'm not a loser," Hobin swings at him. A clean hit which knocks Pakgo to the ground. Again, I'm not saying that specifically is what he should do, but the point being that he accomplished something he didn't think was previously possible, and it completely changed the way he saw himself as a result. Now, he does have some ups and downs throughout the rest of the series, you know, it probably won't be a one and done thing for you, right? But it's clear that he feels less and less like a loser as time goes on. And I've not read past where the anime ends, so if I'm wrong, please don't spoil me, but it seems as though he's only going to grow more and more as a fighter, and more importantly, as a person as well with time. Viral Hit is a brilliantly unique show. You know, the fights in the rest of the series get increasingly more insane, and I absolutely recommend checking it out. However, I think I said all I have to say on this, so in Hobin's words, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you very much for watching this far. I hope you found it useful. Thank you very much to Bomi94 and Lorenzo Tano for joining as a channel member. Let me know what you thought below, and I'll see you all again soon for the next one.